Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat there, back straight, pen tapping once against her notebook. Maps were projected across the wall, banners and flags hung in the dusty air of the forward operations room. The men argued over flight paths and choke points. She didn't speak. No one asked her opinion. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they thought she was just another technician or another quiet face sent to fill a chair. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. And when her chance came, they would see the one thing they always missed. Her courage. She didn't look like the kind of soldier who belonged at that table. She was slight, her features too soft against the harshness of desert fatigue. She wore no medals that caught the light, and still, in her chest, something burned brighter than all the insignia stitched on the uniforms around her. The colonel's voice cracked through the haze. Air support's thin. Ground team goes first. Extraction window, 90 minutes. Anyone who can't hold their weight stays behind. The words landed heavier than the dust. She didn't move, not even a flinch. She'd been left behind once before, on a mission that never made it back to the official reports. That silence had carved into her deeper than shrapnel. Not this time. Someone coughed. Another voice suggested she shouldn't go. She's not cleared for frontline contact. But the colonel didn't look her way. He moved on, his pointer tapping at lines of red ink crossing valleys and villages on the screen. She kept her eyes down, pretending to take notes, pretending not to care. But inside, the weight pressed harder. She knew more about the terrain than any of them. She had studied the ridges, the wind patterns, the dirt tracks children used to walk to school before the war hollowed the place out. She had memorized every mark on those maps, and she carried something heavier than tactical knowledge. She carried a promise. They didn't know about the folded photograph tucked in her chest pocket behind her body armor. They didn't know about the man whose smile was frozen in time, his laugh carried only in memory. They didn't know why she came here in the first place, why she endured the long deployments, the dismissive glances, the doubts. And she wasn't going to tell them, not yet. The meeting broke with the scrape of metal chairs and the stale breath of too much recycled air. Boots scuffed against concrete floors. Men reached for cigarettes, muttered to each other, some joking, some weary. She lingered, letting the room thin out. A sergeant brushed past her. He didn't meet her eyes. None of them did. When the last footsteps faded, she stood, hand brushing over the map one last time. Her fingers hovered over a red circle inked into the corner. A village without a name anymore. Just coordinates, just numbers. She whispered something under her breath. Not a prayer, not really, more of a memory. And then she walked out. The base smelled of fuel and iron. Helicopters coughed dust into the evening air. Generators hummed. She crossed the open yard, the heat of the day still clinging to the concrete. Her gear weighed heavy, but she carried it with practiced ease. Her bunkmate, Ramirez, caught up to her. A man with tired eyes but a kindness that hadn't been burned out yet. He slowed his pace to match hers. "They didn't even let you speak." She shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "It does." His voice had that edge anger on her behalf. "You've been studying those maps for weeks. You see things we don't." Her lips pressed tight. She couldn't let his anger become her own. If she carried that into the mission, it would cloud her judgment. So instead she asked softly, "You ever feel like the less you're noticed, the freer you are to act?" Ramirez tilted his head. "That's not freedom, that's being invisible." She didn't answer. They reached the barracks, and inside, soldiers packed, checked weapons, joked too loudly. She moved past them, her space at the corner bunk quiet, almost forgotten. She liked it that way. While others cleaned their rifles or shared smuggled chocolate, she unfolded her notebook. Not tactical notes this time. Words written in careful, deliberate lines. A journal no one else had ever seen. She wrote about the dust storms that rolled over the ridges, about the way silence hung heavier than gunfire. She wrote about fear, how it never really left, how it just hid behind adrenaline. And she wrote about him, the one whose photograph stayed pressed against her chest. The world thought of courage as loud, shouts, charges, defiance, but hers was different, a quiet kind of courage, one that didn't need recognition, one that simply endured. Later that night, she found herself walking the perimeter. The desert wind hissed against wire fences. Somewhere, music played faintly from a radio, cut with static. She paused, staring out at the dark horizon. Her breath slowed. Out there waiting was a mission, and with it answers she wasn't sure she was ready for. Behind her footsteps, she tensed until a voice broke the quiet. "You don't sleep either." It was Lieutenant Harris, young, cocky on the surface but carrying shadows in his eyes. He leaned against the fence beside her, exhaling smoke into the night. "Not before missions," she admitted. He nodded. "I pretend I'm fine, laugh with the guys, but when it's quiet, it gets to me." Her gaze stayed fixed on the desert. "What gets to you?" He hesitated, then said, almost a whisper, "The faces, the ones you don't forget." She didn't respond, but she understood more than he knew. The silence stretched. Harris flicked away his cigarette, crushed the ember with his boot. "You know they don't see you, not really, but I do. I've read your reports, you're sharp. Don't let their blindness bury you." She turned to him, meeting his eyes. There was no arrogance there now, just honesty, maybe even respect. She nodded once. "Thank you." Then she walked away, leaving him with the night. Dawn came without warning. The desert lit up in pale orange, shadows long and stretched. The base stirred alive, shouted orders, engines rumbling, metal clanging. She strapped on her vest, checked her rifle, adjusted her headset. Every movement precise, practiced, not rushed. Ramirez gave her a look across the yard, a nod that meant, "Stay alive." She returned it, wordless. Helicopters waited, rotors cutting the morning air. Soldiers piled in, laughter forced, nerves buried under bravado. She stepped aboard, finding her corner seat. She liked corners. You saw more from the edges. As the bird lifted, sand whipping through the open side doors, she glanced once more at the folded photo in her chest pocket. She pressed her hand against it, a silent promise. The mission began. The helicopter's roar drowned thought. Dust and sun burned into the windows. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening not to the machine but to her own heartbeat. Steady, ready. She opened them again when Ramirez leaned close. "What's got you here, really?" he asked, voice barely audible over the blades. She hesitated. Her answer was simple, but not one she was ready to speak aloud, so she only said, "Something I can't let go." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "That's enough." The flight stretched long, endless sky and barren land below, villages like scattered bones, roads cut like scars. Then the signal, green light, descent. The team tightened grips on weapons, banter stopped, breathing changed. As the helicopter sank lower, dust rising like ghosts, she felt it again, that quiet courage in her chest, stronger than the banners, stronger than the doubts. Whatever waited below, she was ready to face it. Because being overlooked wasn't a weakness. It was her greatest shield. And no one, not the colonel, not the silence, not the weight of the past, would see her coming. Not until it was too late. What was waiting for them on the ground? The dust swallowed the helicopter as it touched down. The rotors chopped the desert air into chaos. Sand blinded vision, clogged lungs. Soldiers leapt out, boots sinking into dirt, weapons raised. She followed, silent, her eyes narrowed against the storm. No one noticed the way her gaze scanned faster, deeper, not just at the ground, at the silence, the unnatural stillness of a village that should have been alive with voices, footsteps, movement. Something was wrong. The colonel shouted over the noise, hand signals flaring. The team fanned out, rifles sweeping alleys. She moved with them, but not as one of them, always a step aside, watching, listening. Her boot crunched over broken pottery. A dog barked in the distance, sharp and sudden. then stopped too abruptly. Ramirez muttered near her ear, "Feels like a ghost town." She didn't reply. She just let her hand drift near her sidearm, thumb tracing the grip. Because she knew, villages didn't just vanish, silence didn't just happen. Someone made it happen. They moved deeper, past abandoned carts, doors swinging loose on hinges. Banners faded cloth, once proud, hung limp across wires. Wind tugged at them, lifeless. The colonel cursed under his breath. Intel said civilians were here. Where the hell are they? No one answered, but she had her suspicions. At the edge of the square, Harris halted, crouching. His fingers brushed something on the ground. A toy. A wooden horse, wheels broken, one eye painted blue, fresh in the dirt. He looked back at her. Their eyes met. He didn't need words, he felt it too. They weren't alone. The ambush came fast. A crack split the air, rifle fire ricocheting off stone walls. Shouts. Soldiers dove for cover. Dust erupted with every shot. The village, empty seconds ago, came alive with gunfire. She hit the dirt, breath sharp, heart hammering. Bullets ripped overhead. She pressed her cheek against sand, the smell of powder and blood filling her lungs. Contact left, 2 o'clock, someone yelled. The team scrambled, returning fire. Ramirez dragged one of the younger soldiers behind cover, shouting at him to breathe, to aim steady. Harris barked orders, voice cutting through chaos. She peeked around a wall, caught the faintest flicker of movement on a rooftop. Her eyes narrowed. She saw what others missed, the shimmer of a scope. Sniper! Her rifle was slung at her back. She unslung it with calm hands, not rushed, not trembling. She steadied her breath, crouched against the wall and sighted. The world shrank into a single line of glass and dust. One rooftop, one shadow, one glint. She squeezed. The recoil pressed into her shoulder. The shadow dropped. No one saw her, not really. They were too busy in the chaos and the shouting in their own storms. But the silence that followed, one less rifle firing at them, that was hers. The firefight dragged, minutes stretched like hours. Grenades thumped, walls cracked, echoes roared. She moved with precision, not reckless, not loud, just effective, covering angles, seeing gaps, filling them before anyone knew they existed. When Ramirez nearly stumbled into open ground, she yanked him back by his vest, saving his life without a word. When Harris reloaded too slow, she took the shot that kept the enemy from reaching him. No recognition, no thanks, but she didn't need it. Because she wasn't here for their approval. She was here for the promise folded against her heart. At last, the gunfire thinned. The enemy slipped back, vanishing into alleys, leaving silence that felt heavier than the noise. Bodies lay in the dirt, some theirs, some not. The colonel barked orders, frustration sharp in his voice. Secure the square. Check wounded. We're not leaving until intel is verified. He didn't look at her. He never did. But Harris did. His gaze caught hers across the rubble, a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement. He knew what shot had saved him. She nodded back, nothing more. Hours passed in fragments. Medics worked. Radios crackled with broken signals. Flies buzzed thick over heat and blood. She walked the edges of the village, her rifle lowered but her eyes sharp, searching, not just for threats, for signs, for traces of life. And she found one. A door half hidden behind rubble. A streak of small footprints leading toward it, too recent to be ghosts. Her breath caught, children. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, dark air, heavy with fear. A dozen eyes stared back at her, wide, unblinking. Mothers clutching children, elders pressed against walls. They hadn't vanished, they had hidden. Her heart clenched. These were the faces no report would mention, the lives reduced to statistics. She lowered her rifle, held out her hand gently. "It's okay, you're safe." Her voice trembled, not with fear but with something deeper, memory. Because once, years ago, she had been on the other side. A child hiding behind broken walls, clutching her brother's hand as soldiers stormed through. She remembered the silence of fear, the helplessness, the way no one looked her in the eye. She remembered who had promised to protect her and who had failed. And that was why she was here now. She stepped back out, found Ramirez waiting. His eyes darted past her, caught the faces inside. His expression softened. "You found them." She nodded, quiet. "Do we tell the colonel?" he asked. Her gaze shifted across the square, to the flags stitched on uniforms, to the orders that came from voices far away from here. She thought of what would happen if command saw these civilians as burdens, as complications to extraction. Her voice was low, "Not yet." Ramirez studied her, then gave a slow nod, trusting her. It was the weight of a choice she hadn't planned to make, but one she couldn't turn away from now. Night fell. The village was theirs for the moment, but tension lingered like smoke. Fires burned in barrels. Shadows stretched long across ruined walls. She sat near the edge of the square, rifle resting across her knees, her hands still, her mind restless. Ramirez sat beside her, chewing silently on a ration bar. After a long pause, he asked, "What are you carrying, really?" She didn't look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean the thing that keeps you calm when everyone else panics. The thing that makes you take risks without flinching. You're not here for medals or for orders. You're here for something else." Her jaw tightened. For a moment she almost told him, almost. But instead she whispered, "Some things are too heavy to speak." Ramirez nodded, thoughtful. Then he said, softer, "Maybe that's why they overlook you. They don't see what you carry. They don't want to." She closed her eyes briefly. His words cut deeper than he knew. Because he was right. Later Harris approached, settling across from her in the dirt. His face was tired, streaked with dust, but his eyes steady. "You saved me today." She shook her head. "You saved yourself." "No," he said firmly. "I know my angles. That shot wasn't mine." She didn't answer. He studied her for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Why do you stay quiet? Why don't you make them see you?" She met his gaze. "Because if they don't see me, I can do what needs to be done." Harris leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That's not invisibility, that's power." The words lingered, not praise, not dismissal, just truth. She let them settle in the silence, until the night swallowed them. Sleep came in fragments, dreams blurred with memory, a face she couldn't let go of, a voice she couldn't hear anymore, a promise still burning. And when dawn touched the ruins again, painting the banners overhead with pale light, she stood ready. The mission wasn't over. The real test hadn't begun. Because the civilians hiding in the shadows had changed everything. She knew what command would say, what the colonel would decide, what the numbers would demand. And she knew she would have to choose. Between orders and humanity. Why didn't she tell the colonel about the hidden families? Morning broke across the village, thin lights spilling over broken rooftops. The air was still heavy with gunpowder, the kind that clung to skin even after the fighting had stopped. Soldiers stirred, cleaning rifles, checking radios, forcing down rations. Orders hovered unspoken, waiting for the colonel's word. But she knew what those words would be. The civilians hiding behind that crumbling door weren't part of the plan. They weren't on the map. They weren't in the extraction window. To command, they were noise in the signal, and noise got cut. She sat against a wall, helmet in her lap, watching her breath fog faintly in the cool air. Her thoughts weren't on the next patrol. They were on the children's eyes, wide, dark, terrified. They reminded her of herself years ago, the faces that haunted her, the promise that pulled her here. Ramirez crouched beside her, quiet as always. He didn't ask if she'd slept. He knew she hadn't. He just said, "We can't keep them hidden forever." Her fingers tapped lightly on her helmet, each beat a measure of thought. "I know." "So what do we do?" She didn't answer because she didn't know, not yet. The colonel called them together mid-morning. His voice cut sharp through the air. Intel verified. Enemy retreated into the ridges. Our job is done here. Extraction in 60. Relief flickered across faces. Nods, shoulder slaps, survivors of another day. But her chest tightened. The civilians weren't done. They were still behind that door, still waiting for something more than silence. Ramirez glanced at her. Harris, too. Both had seen the truth in her eyes, both waiting to see if she'd speak. She didn't, not yet. Because speaking meant risk. Speaking meant choosing. And she wasn't ready to show her hand. The minutes before departure blurred into routine, gear packed, weapons checked, medics finishing bandages. Soldiers joked too loudly, their laughter brittle. She slipped away, back to the hidden door. The mothers rose when they saw her, children clinging tight. One of the elders stepped forward, his face lined with years and dust. He didn't speak English, but his eyes said enough. "What will happen to us?" Her throat tightened. She crouched low, whispering softly though they couldn't understand. "I see you. I won't leave you here." The words felt like a vow, heavy and real. She touched her chest over the photo. The promise doubled, one to the past, one to the present. Then she stood and walked back to the square, heart pounding. Because she knew she couldn't keep silent forever. The helicopters arrived on schedule. The thump of rotors echoed across the ruins, wind tearing banners from broken walls. Soldiers moved fast, relief in every step. The colonel barked, "Load up, move." She froze, her boots felt nailed to the dirt. Behind her, Ramirez watched, his jaw clenched. Harris looked from her to the choppers, sensing the fracture coming. Her voice caught in her throat. This was the moment, speak or stay silent. She spoke. "There are civilians, hidden in the village." The words fell heavy, louder than the rotors. Heads turned, soldiers stared. The colonel's eyes locked on her, sharp as glass. "What did you say?" Her pulse hammered, but her voice didn't waver. "They're alive. Women, children, we can't leave them here." The colonel's jaw tightened. His silence was worse than a shout. Then he snapped, "Not our mission. We don't have transport capacity. We move now." A hollow ache punched through her chest. She had expected resistance, but not dismissal this cold. "Sir," she pressed, "if we leave them, they won't survive. Enemy will come back, you know they will." The colonel's eyes burned. "You're out of line, soldier, fall in." The others shifted uneasily. Ramirez's fists clenched at his sides. Harris's mouth opened, then shut again. No one dared speak. The choice hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Orders or humanity? She didn't move. Her silence stretched, long, defiant. The colonel's face hardened. "If you disobey, you jeopardize this entire unit." Her lips parted. The words came steady though her chest shook. "If I obey, they die." A beat of stunned silence. Even the rotors seemed to falter. Then the colonel spat, "You think this war bends for your conscience. It doesn't. We leave, now." He turned, signaling the others. Some followed without question, relief in obedience. But a few, Ramirez, Harris, hesitated, torn between chain of command and the truth staring them in the face. Her eyes swept over them, not pleading, just steady. A quiet question, "Will you see what I see?" The first helicopter lifted, dust billowing. The second waited. Soldiers shouted, hands waving, urgency thick. Ramirez cursed under his breath. "Damn it!" He looked at her, eyes fierce. "I'm with you." Harris hesitated a heartbeat longer. Then slowly, he slung his rifle across his back and stepped to her side. "Two's better than one." The choice rippled. Some glanced at the colonel, others at her, but no one else moved. The colonel's voice roared over the storm. "You've just signed your own death warrants." She didn't flinch. "Better ours than theirs." And just like that, the last helicopter rose, leaving behind dust, silence, and the weight of betrayal. When the noise faded, only 3 of them remained. 3 soldiers, 1 broken village, and a dozen hidden lives depending on them. Ramirez let out a shaky laugh. Well, guess we're not invisible anymore. Harris exhaled sharply, scanning the horizon. Extraction gone. Reinforcements aren't coming. We're on our own. She looked back toward the hidden door, then forward to the ridges where enemy forces had vanished. Her voice was low, steady. Then we move them before the enemy does. The day turned into a blur of decisions heavier than weapons. They gathered the civilians, frightened, slow, burdened with what little they could carry. She spoke softly, guiding children, steadying the old. Ramirez carried two at a time, his strength quiet but vital. Harris mapped routes with sharp eyes, calculating safe paths through the broken terrain. Every step was a risk, every sound could betray them, but every step also meant life. And for her, every step echoed with memory. A child's hand in hers years ago, a promise whispered by someone she had loved and lost, a vow never to let fear steal innocence again. Night fell before they reached safety. They sheltered in a ravine, hidden by rocks and shadows. A small fire flickered, barely enough to warm but enough to hold off despair. The civilians huddled close. Mothers whispered lullabies. Children clutched carved toys, worn clothes each other. Ramirez sat with his back against stone, chest heaving, sweat streaked with dust. You realize what we've done, right? We've gone rogue, no command, no supply chain, just us. She nodded, I know. Harris added quieter, they'll brand us as deserters, or worse. Her hand pressed against her chest pocket, the photo within. Her voice softened. Some things are worth it. Neither man argued. Because they saw it too, the faces of the civilians lit faintly by firelight. Not numbers, not noise, lives. Later, when the others slept in uneasy shifts, she sat awake, staring at the sky. Stars burned sharp above the desert. Cold air wrapped around her shoulders. Her thoughts drifted, to the man in the photo, to promises made, to the strange way courage often looked like disobedience. Ramirez stirred, half asleep, muttering, You're not like the rest of us, you know. She turned her head. What do you mean? You're carrying something bigger than orders, something none of us can see. That's why you don't break. Her chest ached at his words, but she didn't deny them. Because he was right. By dawn, the desert was awake again. Wind pushed sand across the ravine. The civilians stirred, weary but alive. She stood, shoulders squared. Harris rose beside her. Ramirez stretched, groaning. Where do we take them? Harris asked. She looked east, toward distant mountains, toward the unknown. Somewhere safe, she said. Safe doesn't exist here, Ramirez muttered. Her eyes narrowed. Then we'll make it exist. The words sounded simple, but behind them lay everything she was, everything she carried, everything she had promised. And as the group began to move, banners of dust trailing their steps, she knew the real mission had only just begun. How far could 3 soldiers take a dozen civilians across hostile desert? The morning stretched out before them, endless sand and broken ridges. Wind hissed across the ground, tugging at scarves, stinging eyes. Every step left a mark. Every mark left a trail. She led the line, eyes fixed forward, scanning every shadow. The civilians shuffled behind her, burdened by fear and hunger. Ramirez brought up the rear, steady as stone, carrying what others couldn't. Harris darted from point to point, scouting ahead, his rifle always ready. None of them spoke much. Words took energy, and every breath mattered. But silence didn't quiet the questions clawing at her mind. How long before the enemy realized survivors had fled? How long before command labeled them traitors? How long could she carry the weight of 2 promises, one folded in her chest pocket, one walking in her footsteps? The desert gave no answers, only heat, only emptiness. By midday, the sun was merciless. Children whimpered, mothers hushed them, elders stumbled. Sweat carved rivers down tired faces. Ramirez paused, sliding his pack off. We need shade just for an hour." "There is no shade," Harris muttered. His eyes scanned the horizon, restless. "If we stop, we're sitting targets." She stood between them, torn. Ramirez was right, these people couldn't march forever. Harris was right too, rest meant risk. But then she saw it. A cluster of stones ahead, jagged, stacked by nature into a shallow overhang, enough to shield from sun, not from enemies, but from collapse. 10 minutes, she decided, no more. They moved. Civilians collapsed gratefully beneath the rocks. Children sipped water from shared canteens. Ramirez knelt to help an old woman unwrap her blistered feet. Harris paced, scanning horizons like a caged wolf. She stood at the edge of the group, every nerve alert. Her rifle felt heavier with each passing hour. Her eyes kept flicking east, toward the mountains she promised, still so far. And deep inside, another weight pressed harder. The folded photograph, his face, his voice, the vow she had whispered once and broken. This time, she told herself, she wouldn't break. Gunfire shattered the moment. Sharp, sudden, echoing across stone. Bullets chewed into rock, splintering sparks. Civilians screamed. Children ducked. Harris dropped instantly, rifle barking in reply. Ramirez dragged 2 civilians closer to cover, shouting over the chaos. She fell prone, sighted quick. A ridge half a mile out, muzzle flash, enemy silhouettes. They had been tracked. Her breath slowed, she squeezed. One target dropped, Harris got another. Ramirez cursed, their flanking right. The civilians huddled tighter, terror painted across their faces. She saw them and memory collided, the same fear in her own eyes as a child. She steadied herself. Not this time. Not on her watch. The firefight roared, dust clouds, echoes, shouts. And then silence. The last shot echoed away. Bodies slumped on the ridge. No movement remained. She stayed prone, sight steady, waiting, listening. Only wind replied. Harris lowered his rifle, breath ragged. "We need to move. Now, they'll call reinforcements." Ramirez looked at her, sweat streaking his face. "They know we're out here. There'll be more." Her jaw clenched. The civilians stared at her, waiting for direction, even if they didn't understand her words. Her choice, again, always her choice. "East," she said, "keep moving." The hours that followed blurred into exhaustion. Steps dragged. Canteens emptied too fast. Harris scouted less and less, conserving energy. Ramirez shouldered packs that weren't his, grunting with each mile. But she kept moving. Every ache ignored, every doubt buried. She had to, for them, for him. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert in fire and shadow, they found a dry riverbed. Shelter, concealment. The civilians collapsed in the sand, too tired to care about comfort. Some wept quietly, others just stared, empty. Ramirez sat heavily beside her, sweat dripping. "We can't keep this pace. They'll break before we reach the mountains." Harris leaned against a boulder, eyes narrowed. "And the enemy's closing. You heard the calm chatter before extraction. They won't let civilians slip away. They'll hunt us." The weight pressed harder. She rubbed her thumb over the photo in her pocket, the edges soft from years of handling. She whispered inside, unheard, "Tell me what to do." No answer came, only the rustle of wind through dry earth. That night she couldn't sleep. The civilians huddled in clusters, whispering, praying. Harris dozed light, rifle within reach. Ramirez snored softly, exhaustion dragging him under. She sat awake, staring at the stars, clear, sharp, endless. Her thoughts drifted, back to the promise she'd made years ago. Her brother. His face came sharp in memory, brighter than the stars. The day the village burned. The day soldiers stormed through, faceless behind helmets. She had hidden, he had not. She had survived, he had not. That was the moment courage was born in her, not the loud kind, the quiet one, the one that endured. And when she'd grown, when war offered her a uniform, she took it, not for glory, not for banners, but for him, For the promise, she whispered at his grave, no one else will die like you did, not if I can help it. That vow had carried her through training, through deployments, through the silence of being overlooked. That vow had brought her here, to this desert, to these people. And now the vow demanded more than she'd ever given. At dawn, Harris shook her shoulder. His voice was low, urgent. Movement, West Ridge. She scrambled to her feet, rifle ready. Ramirez was already rousing civilians, whispering for silence. Shadows moved along the ridge, shapes many too many. Enemy patrol. Her pulse quickened, Harris's jaw clenched. They'll cut us off before we reach the mountains. Ramirez muttered, we can't fight that many, not with civilians. The group huddled close, fear trembling in their breath. Children clung tighter to mothers. Elders whispered prayers. Her eyes swept the ridge, then the dry riverbed, then the mountains in the distance. Choices spiraled, each worse than the last. They couldn't outrun, they couldn't outgun. Unless someone slowed the enemy. Her chest tightened. The thought clawed sharp. Her gaze flicked to Harris, to Ramirez, then to the civilians, to the little girl clutching a wooden horse, to the old man whose eyes still held a spark of dignity. She knew what needed to be done. But she didn't say it, not yet. They moved at first light, keeping low in the riverbed. Harris led, fast but careful. Ramirez guided the rear, steadying stragglers. She walked in the middle, rifle loose but mind sharp, every sense alive, every nerve aware of the enemy's shadows growing closer. The civilians moved slower now, too slow. Harris hissed, frustrated, they'll catch us at this pace. Then we buy time, she said quietly. Ramirez glanced at her, eyes narrowing. What are you thinking? Nothing yet. Her voice was steady, but inside the weight grew heavier. Because she knew. It was only a matter of when. By midday, the enemy patrol was closer. She could feel it, like breath on the back of her neck. Harris's curses grew sharper. Ramirez's face hardened. The civilians were faltering. Blisters bled, feet dragged, hunger gnawed. And still she pushed them forward, step by step, promise by promise. Because she knew she had to get them further before the choice came. Before she made it. That night they sheltered in a cave carved into the riverbank. Darkness cloaked them. A fire burned low. Ramirez sat close, voice quiet. You're planning something. She didn't look at him. I'm planning survival. Don't lie. His eyes burned into hers. I know that look. You're ready to sacrifice yourself. Her throat tightened. Silence was safer, but his gaze demanded truth. She whispered, if it's me or them, you know the answer. Ramirez's jaw clenched. Anger flickered in his eyes, but so did sorrow. You don't get to decide that alone. Harris spoke from the shadows. He's right, we're in this together. You go down, we go down with you. She turned to both of them, voice low, firm. No, if I fall, you keep moving them. That's the promise. Ramirez shook his head. That's not your choice. But she didn't argue further, because deep down she knew. It was already decided. When dawn came, the air felt heavier. The civilians stirred, weary, unaware of the storm waiting. She stood at the cave's mouth, staring east. The mountains loomed closer now, jagged and cold. Safety, or something like it, waited there. But so did the enemy. And she knew tomorrow, or the day after, she would have to choose. The question wasn't whether. It was how. Why did the morning air feel heavier, thicker, like the desert itself knew what was coming? She sensed it before she saw it, a weight pressing against her chest, an instinct whispering they're close. The civilians stirred slowly, stiff from another sleepless night. Mothers brushed sand from their children's faces. An old man rubbed his hands, muttering prayers. Harris stood at the mouth of the cave, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Ramirez tightened his boots, his face set like stone. When she stepped outside, the wind carried a faint sound, distant boots on rock. Not close enough to see, close enough to know. The enemy was hunting. They moved quickly that morning, no words wasted. The civilians walked in silence, exhaustion etched into every step. But their silence carried fear, thick and heavy. Harris scouted ahead, darting from ridge to ridge, signaling when the path was clear. Ramirez stayed at the rear, coaxing the slow, carrying the weak. She walked in the center, every sense sharpened. Every so often she glanced back. Nothing but sand and broken stone, but she knew they were out there, closing in. Her hand brushed against the folded photograph in her pocket. Her brother's face, his memory, his promise. It steadied her. It reminded her why she walked, why she couldn't stop. But the question burned. How much further could she push them before they broke? By midday, the desert showed no mercy. Heat pressed down, relentless. The civilians stumbled, sweat blurring their vision. A boy collapsed to his knees, too weak to stand. She crouched beside him, her voice gentle. "On your feet, one more step, just one." The boy looked up, eyes glassy. She thought of her brother again, the last time she saw him alive, standing defiant though his legs trembled. Her throat tightened. She helped the boy up, his weight light as bone. Step by step they moved again. But behind them, faint dust rose on the horizon. Harris cursed under his breath. "They're gaining." Her chest tightened. The moment was coming faster than she wanted. That evening they found a ravine, narrow and deep, carved by rain long gone. Shelter for a night, maybe a chance to breathe. Civilians collapsed against the walls, too tired to care. Ramirez passed around what little food remained, half rations, torn into smaller pieces so each hand received something. Harris crouched at the ravine's edge, scanning the distance, restless. She sat alone for a moment, back against stone. The photo rested in her hands. Her thumb brushed the faded image. Her brother's smile looked almost defiant, frozen in time. A smile that never grew old because he never had the chance. Her chest ached. She whispered to him, words too soft for others to hear. "I won't fail them, not like I failed you." Later, Harris joined her. His voice was low, clipped. "You know what's coming." She didn't answer. Silence said enough. He leaned closer, eyes sharp. "Don't do it. Don't throw yourself away." Her jaw clenched. "If someone doesn't slow them, they'll catch us." "Then we fight together." His voice cracked on the word together. She turned to him, steady. "If we fight together, we all die. If I stay behind, you can move them. That's survival." Harris's eyes burned. For a moment she saw the soldier's mask fall, revealing the man beneath. "You think your life is worth less than theirs." Her throat tightened. "I think mine was already spent the day I joined." Harris shook his head, anger and sorrow tangled. "You're wrong, you're more than that." She looked away, unable to bear his gaze, because part of her wanted to believe him, and part of her knew she couldn't. That night Ramirez found her awake, staring at the stars again. He sat heavily beside her, silent at first. Then he spoke, voice rough. "I know why you carry that picture." Her heart skipped. She turned slowly. He nodded at her pocket. "Saw you looking at it, every night, every break." Her fingers tightened around the fabric. She didn't answer. Ramirez continued. "My sister, she died when I was 16. Bombing, wrong place, wrong time. I joined to make sure no one else lost a sister like I did." The air thickened. She finally whispered, "My brother, soldiers came, I hid, he didn't." Ramirez's eyes softened. "That's why you fight so hard." She nodded, unable to speak. Silence stretched between them, heavy but human. For the first time, she didn't feel completely alone in her grief. Dawn came too fast. The first sound was Harris's curse, then the civilians' murmurs rising in panic. She ran to the ravine's edge. Her chest went cold. On the horizon, dust, many figures, too many. The enemy patrol had found them. The civilians panicked, voices trembling, fear contagious. Children cried. Mothers held them tighter. Ramirez shouted for calm, his voice a wall of command. Harris gripped his rifle, jaw clenched. She scanned the ridge, mind racing. Options flickered, none good. Ramirez grabbed her arm. We can move now, push hard, maybe we outrun them. Harris shook his head sharply. Not with civilians, they'll catch us. Both men looked at her, waiting, expecting. Her throat tightened because she knew the truth. They wouldn't outrun them, not like this, not all together. And that left one choice. Her decision formed like stone inside her chest, heavy, unshakable. She turned to Ramirez and Harris. Her voice was steady, though her heart trembled. Take them east, keep them moving, don't stop. Ramirez frowned. What are you? She cut him off. I'll stay, I'll slow them. Harris's face twisted with fury. No, we're not leaving you. Her gaze hardened. You will, because if you don't, they all die. The civilians watched her, fear wide in their eyes. Some didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. She walked to the little girl who clutched the wooden horse. She crouched, smiled softly, and whispered, "Keep walking, don't look back." The girl nodded, though tears welled. She stood, looked to Ramirez and Harris. This is the only way. Harris's fists clenched, shaking. Ramirez's jaw worked, eyes wet. Finally, Ramirez nodded, voice low. We'll get them there for you. Harris turned away, unable to speak. She breathed deep, felt the photo in her pocket, whispered inside, for you too, brother. She climbed the ridge alone. The sun rose higher, casting her shadow long across stone. Below, the enemy patrol spread wide, moving fast, too many to face head-on. But she didn't need to win. She only needed time. She set her rifle, checked her last round, listened to the silence. The civilians moved east, guided by Ramirez and Harris. Their figures grew smaller with each step. She stayed alone. Her breath steadied, her pulse slowed. The enemy crept closer. And when the first soldier came into sight, she whispered, not to them but to the memory she carried. Not today. The rifle cracked. Echoes rolled across the desert. Dust lifted where her bullet struck. The enemy froze, ducked, scattered. She shifted, fired again. A shadow dropped. They shouted now, pointing, trying to flank. She moved with calm precision, shifting angles, vanishing behind stone, reappearing somewhere else. Every shot was deliberate, every movement a delay. She counted each second, not in numbers but in steps eastward, every heartbeat she bought for those behind her. Her brother's face burned in memory, proud and defiant. She imagined him walking beside the civilians, alive through them. The enemy advanced, she fired, moved, fired again. And when her magazine ran dry, silence fell heavy. But the civilians were further now, safe enough. Her rifle slid empty to the ground. Her hand brushed the photo one last time. And still she stood tall. Because even if they overlooked her face, they would see her courage. How far could they walk before her absence crushed them? The civilians moved east through the dry ravine, feet dragging, shoulders slumped. Ramirez led with silent urgency, glancing back more often than forward. Harris followed, rifle gripped so tight his knuckles whitened. Behind them, faint echoes still carried, sharp cracks of a rifle, distant shouts, the thud of chaos rolling across stone. Each sound twisted their chests. Each silence was worse. No one asked the question aloud, but every face whispered it. Was she still alive? The boy she had lifted the day before stumbled again. Ramirez caught him by the arm, steadying. Keep moving, he urged, softer than his usual bark. The boy's lips trembled. Harris looked at the child, then away, jaw clenched. His eyes burned as if every tear was a failure. They all knew whose strength was missing. She had been the gravity holding them together, and now, without her, the weight was theirs. Still, step by step, they moved. Hours stretched. The desert swallowed sound except for their trudging boots. The sun scorched. The air shimmered. Ramirez scanned ahead, spotting a small cluster of boulders. Shelter. He raised a hand, signaling rest. The civilians collapsed gratefully, forming a circle of exhaustion. Harris dropped beside them, breathing hard. He hadn't spoken since the ridge. Ramirez crouched near him. "We keep them moving, that's what she wanted." Harris's head snapped up, eyes wild. "Don't," his voice broke. He looked away, grinding his teeth. Ramirez stayed calm. "You think she wanted us to waste what she gave us? You think she wanted us to sit here and—" Harris slammed a fist into the dirt. "She should still be here." His voice cracked like glass. Civilians flinched at the sharpness, children clutching mothers. Ramirez's voice dropped, firm but low. "She chose, and you know why." Harris swallowed hard, shoulders trembling. He turned his face away, but his eyes glistened in the fading light. Silence returned, heavy and raw. That night they made camp between the boulders. No fire, no noise, only whispers carried like secrets. One of the elders, his beard silver and tangled, approached Ramirez. His voice trembled but carried gratitude. "The woman, she saved us. May the earth remember her name." Ramirez bowed his head. He didn't have her name to give them. They'd never asked. She never offered. It hit him then, how little he knew. The soldier who had carried them this far. The woman who had stood against death so they could breathe. A stranger, and yet not a stranger at all. Later, Harris sat alone, staring at the horizon. Ramirez joined him, lowering himself with a grunt. For a while they said nothing. The desert spoke for them, wind, silence, distant howls. Finally, Ramirez broke it. "You cared about her." Harris's jaw worked. "She wasn't supposed to." He stopped, shook his head. "We could have fought together, I could have." "No," Ramirez cut in. "She knew we'd follow if she didn't make it absolute. That's why she didn't argue. That's why she walked up that ridge alone." Harris's hands shook. "She didn't give me the chance to choose." Ramirez's voice softened. "Sometimes the choice is too heavy to share." The words lingered, heavy between them. Neither spoke again, but both felt the wound sharp, fresh, unhealed. The next morning they woke early. Hunger clawed harder now. Water was nearly gone, feet blistered raw. And still, eastward they moved. Ramirez pushed the civilians, gentle but unyielding. Harris scouted, though his eyes were hollow. The mountains grew closer, jagged peaks, harsh but promising. Safety, or at least the end of the desert. But shadows haunted every step. Every ridge looked like a trap. Every gust of wind carried the memory of gunfire. And through it all, the silence of her absence pressed on them like a weight none of them could name. By midday, a storm rose. Sand whipped across the sky, blotting the sun. Visibility shrank to yards. The civilians huddled together, shielding faces with cloth. Ramirez guided them by touch, hand on shoulders, steady voice cutting through wind. Harris pressed forward, scouting blind, steps uncertain but relentless. The storm howled like grief, burying the world in grit. And through it Harris thought he heard something. A faint echo, not the wind, not thunder, something else. Gunfire. He froze, chest pounding. Ramirez stumbled into him. "What is it?" Harris strained his ears, heart racing. The storm carried it faint, broken. But it was there, shots, a fight. "She's still," he stopped himself, the words choking. His face twisted, torn between hope and dread. Ramirez caught his gaze, reading what he wouldn't say. For a moment, something flickered between them. Neither spoke it aloud, but the thought was there, unshakable. What if she was still alive? The storm passed by nightfall, leaving the desert raw and broken. The group found shallow caves at the mountain's base, shelter at last. Civilians collapsed, too drained to move further. Ramirez and Harris sat at the entrance, scanning the horizon. The world beyond was quiet, too quiet. Harris clenched his rifle, his voice cracked. "If she's still out there." Ramirez cut him off firm. "If she's out there, she made her choice. And if she's not," he exhaled heavy, "we honor it by surviving." Harris shook his head. "That's not enough." Ramirez looked at him, tired but steady. Sometimes it has to be. Inside the cave, the civilians whispered prayers. A mother kissed her child's forehead. The old man traced patterns in the sand. A girl clutched her wooden horse, staring at the cave wall. And one by one, they spoke softly of the woman who had saved them. Even without knowing her name, they remembered her in fragments, her calm voice, her steady hands, her eyes that carried storms. In their words, she lived. That night, Harris dreamed of her. He saw her standing on the ridge, silhouette framed against fire and dust, rifle steady, face unflinching. He tried to run to her, but his legs wouldn't move. He shouted, but no sound left his throat. The enemy closed in. Shots rang. She stood tall, fearless. And then silence. Harris jolted awake, sweat cold, chest heaving. He stared into the dark cave, heart breaking against the silence. Morning came with no answers, only the same choice as before. Keep moving east or turn back. Ramirez tightened his pack. The civilians need safety. That's our mission now. Harris hesitated, torn in half. His voice was low, almost pleading. If she's alive, we can't leave her. Ramirez's eyes hardened. And if she's dead, we can't die chasing ghosts. The words cut deep, but Harris couldn't argue, not yet. So they led the civilians higher into the mountains, each step scraping away at their strength. But every shadow in the rocks looked like her. Every whisper of wind sounded like her voice. Every heartbeat carried her absence like a wound that refused to close. And still, beneath the grief, beneath the silence, one truth kept burning. They hadn't seen her fall. And until they did, a part of them would never stop listening for her return. How long could hope survive without proof? The mountains loomed higher, jagged teeth against the pale sky. Each step upward was heavier than the last, the air thinner, colder. The civilians dragged themselves along narrow trails, clinging to stone with trembling hands. Ramirez pushed them forward, his strength steady, unyielding. Harris moved ahead, scouting the passes, but his eyes weren't on the rocks. His eyes were always searching the horizon behind them, listening for a sound that never came. Because hope, once planted, refused to die. 3 days had passed since the ridge. 3 days since she had stayed behind, alone. 3 days since her rifle's echoes had faded into silence. And silence was the cruelest sound of all. Ramirez carried the weight with quiet endurance, never slowing, never stopping. But Harris, his heart gnawed at him with every mile. He couldn't eat. He barely slept. His dreams were filled with her face, her voice, the look in her eyes before she climbed that ridge. It wasn't just duty. It wasn't just loyalty. It was something heavier, something he hadn't admitted until it was too late. The civilians whispered about her often. The woman who had stood between them and death. The woman who had vanished into gunfire. Some said she had fallen, her courage buying their escape. Others said she had walked away untouched, a ghost carried by the desert. The girl with the wooden horse clutched it tighter each night. Sometimes she whispered to the toy, words too soft for others to hear, as if she believed the soldier was listening through it. Ramirez noticed. He said nothing, but each time his chest ached. On the 4th day, Harris stopped at a ridge, staring down into a narrow valley below. He froze, his breath caught. Tracks. Boot prints in the dust, dozens enemy. But among them, one set smaller, lighter, moving away from the others. His chest pounded. He crouched low, fingers brushing the prints, clear, distinct. She had been here. He rose fast, voice breaking. Ramirez. Ramirez climbed beside him, brow furrowed. Harris pointed down. It's her, she made it. Ramirez stared at the prints, his jaw clenched. Could be anyone. It's her, Harris insisted, eyes blazing. Look, stride, wait, you know it. Ramirez exhaled slowly. His silence said enough. The civilians gathered, confused, watching. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the fire in Harris's face. Hope had been given shape. That night Harris paced the cave restlessly. She's alive. She's out there. We can find her. Ramirez sat with his back against stone, arms crossed, exhaustion dragging at him. Our mission is the civilians. She is the mission, Harris snapped, his voice cracked with fury and grief. She gave herself for them, for us, and you just leave her. Ramirez's gaze hardened. If she wanted saving, she wouldn't have stayed behind. Harris's fist shook. Or maybe she stayed because she knew we'd leave. Maybe she believed too much in us. The cave fell silent. The civilians whispered, tense at the rising voices. Ramirez's tone softened, low but heavy. I want to believe she's alive. God knows I do, but belief won't get these people to safety. Harris turned away, eyes burning. He whispered so only he could hear, I won't stop looking. At dawn they climbed higher. Snow dusted the peaks now. The air stung cold, burning lungs. The civilians wrapped themselves in rags, trembling against wind. Every step was agony, hunger, thirst, fear. But still, Harris's eyes kept searching the valleys, the ridges, the shadows. Every shape of stone looked like her silhouette. Every gust of wind carried her name. And then, on the fifth night, they heard it. A sound. Footsteps unsteady, dragging. The civilians stirred, whispering. Harris shot to his feet, rifle raised, heart hammering. Ramirez readied his weapon, body tense. The cave mouth glowed faint in moonlight. A shadow staggered into view. And then she appeared. Her figure was gaunt, clothes torn, face streaked with blood and dust. Her rifle was gone. One arm hung limp, wrapped in makeshift bandages. But her eyes, those eyes still burned, fierce, alive. For a heartbeat, silence crushed the cave. No one breathed. Then Harris dropped his rifle, rushing forward. He caught her before her knees gave way, holding her upright. His voice cracked, raw. You're alive, God, you're alive. She exhaled, shaky, whispering, They didn't follow, I led them away. Ramirez moved fast, steadying her other side. His voice was low but urgent. You're safe now, you made it. The civilians rose to their feet. Murmurs swept the cave, soft prayers, tears spilling. The girl with the wooden horse ran forward, clutching it to her chest, then froze, too shy to reach. The woman crouched, weak but steady, and touched the girl's shoulder. Her smile was faint but real. And in that moment, the civilians saw her not as a soldier but as something greater, a survivor, a promise kept. Later, as Ramirez bound her wounds, Harris sat close, eyes fixed on her face as if afraid she'd vanish again. She spoke softly, voice raw. I thought I wouldn't make it, but every step I kept seeing them, all of you, I couldn't stop. Harris's throat tightened. He wanted to say everything he'd held back, how she wasn't just a soldier to him, how she wasn't just duty, but the words stuck. Instead, he whispered, You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she looked away to the civilians huddled together, her face softened. I never carried it alone, not really. They rested for 2 days in the cave, giving her time to heal. Ramirez guarded the entrance, silent as ever but more watchful. The civilians gathered near her, offering food, water, quiet company. Harris barely left her side. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't, but his presence was constant. She didn't tell them everything that had happened after the ridge. Not yet. The ambush, the close calls, the night she thought she wouldn't rise again. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her brother's face, and she knew she had kept the promise. On the third morning, they rose together. The mountains loomed higher still, peaks crowned with snow. But for the first time, the weight wasn't crushing. Because she was with them again. Her face scarred, her body bruised. But her courage, stronger than the banners flying overhead, was unbroken. And as they moved upward, toward safety, toward the unknown, one truth echoed in every heart. She had been overlooked once, but never again. Why did silence feel heavier than sound? The snow muted everything. Footsteps, breath, even fear. The mountains had swallowed them whole, leaving only the crunch of boots and the ragged rhythm of lungs fighting thin air. For days they climbed. The civilians stumbled often. Children shivered, clinging to their mothers. Men leaned on staffs, their bodies hollowed by hunger and exhaustion. Yet they moved because she moved. Her arm was still bound, her body scarred, but her steps were steady. She carried no rifle now, only will, and in her presence the weary found the strength to rise again. Ramirez led from the front, scanning for danger with a soldier's cold eyes. Harris trailed close to her side, every movement guarded, as if his watch alone could hold her together. But inside him, questions burned like fire. How much longer could she carry this weight? How much longer until the silence between them demanded words? On the seventh day in the high peaks, they found the ridge. The pass was narrow, carved between walls of stone. Beyond it, a valley stretched wide, green, living, free. A village waited there. Smoke from distant hearths curled faint into the sky. The civilians gasped, some wept. Harris's chest loosened for the first time in weeks. Relief was so sharp it felt like pain. "We made it," he whispered. Ramirez said nothing, only scanned the horizon with wary eyes. But his shoulders eased, if only slightly. The woman stood still at the ridge, staring out across the valley. The wind caught her hair, the sun spilling gold against her scarred face. And yet her expression wasn't relief. It was something quieter, something heavier. Harris stepped closer, his voice was soft. "What is it?" She didn't look at him. "We got them here, that's what matters." "You matter," Harris said, too fast, too sharp. His throat tightened. "Don't you see that?" She turned, finally meeting his eyes. In hers was a storm, gratitude, sorrow, something unspoken. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, gaze breaking away. Because words weren't enough, not for what she carried, not for what she had lost. They entered the valley together. The villagers welcomed them with shock and awe. Survivors who had escaped through mountains, led by strangers, carried by a woman half broken yet unbending. Food was offered, blankets, shelter, tears. The civilians collapsed into safety, into the arms of those who thought them lost. The girl with the wooden horse found her father waiting, his face carved with grief until joy broke it wide. She ran into his arms, clutching the toy tight. He looked at the soldier then. His lips trembled with words he couldn't form. She nodded once, enough to tell him she understood. Harris and Ramirez stood apart, watching. Both men knew the mission wasn't finished until they were back across the border, until reports were written, until medals were pinned. But for her, this was the end. The civilians were safe. The promise was kept. That night the village celebrated. Fires burned bright, warming frostbitten hands. Songs drifted into the cold sky. Laughter, tears, prayers. She sat apart, on the edge of the firelight, her gaze fixed on the dark peaks behind them, on the silence where echoes of gunfire still lived. Harris approached quietly. He sat beside her, close enough to share the warmth of the fire but not touching. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the crackle of flames filled the air. Then she whispered, voice hoarse. He would have been their age by now. Harris turned. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, fixed on the children sleeping nearby. "My brother," she said softly. "He was just a boy when the war took him. I promised him, I promised myself, I'd never let another child be left behind." Her voice broke. The firelight wavered across her face. Harris swallowed hard. His hand twitched as if to reach for hers. But instead he whispered, "You didn't let them down. You never did." Her jaw tightened. "I let him down." The silence cut deep. Harris leaned closer, his voice fierce but trembling. "No, you honored him, every step, every shot, every breath you kept going. That's not letting him down, that's keeping him alive in them." Her breath hitched. She looked at him then, truly looked, past his uniform, past his duty, into the man who had refused to stop believing she was alive. Something shifted in her eyes, not relief, not joy, but recognition. And for Harris, that was enough. Days later, they prepared to leave. The civilians begged them to stay, but duty pulled the soldiers onward, always onward. Ramirez organized supplies. Harris checked weapons. She stood at the village edge, staring at the horizon. The villagers had given her a scarf, bright and woven, to replace the tattered rags of war. She wore it without pride, without ceremony, simply as it was offered, an act of human kindness. The girl with the wooden horse came running, breathless. She pressed the toy into the soldier's hands. The woman shook her head gently. "It's yours, keep it." But the girl insisted, pushing it forward, eyes wide, refusing to let go. The soldier's chest ached. Slowly she accepted it. The wood was worn smooth, the paint chipped, but in her palm it felt heavier than steel. She crouched, meeting the girl's gaze. Her voice was soft. "I'll keep it safe." The girl smiled, tear-streaked but fierce. Then she ran back into her father's arms. And the woman, scarred, silent, unbroken, tucked the wooden horse into her pack. Their journey back was quieter. No ambushes, no gunfire, just the endless weight of silence and memory. Harris stayed close, words always near the edge of his tongue but never crossing. Ramirez walked steady, his silence less guarded now, more respectful. And she carried herself not as someone returning from war, but as someone who had left a part of herself in the mountains. Because some battles never end. They live on in scars, in echoes, in the weight of promises kept. When they finally crossed the border, soldiers greeted them. Vehicles waited. Reports demanded. The civilians were escorted away, safe, alive, forever changed. And she stood there watching them go, her face unreadable, her hand brushing the wooden horse in her pack. Harris stepped closer, his voice low. "They'll never forget you." She shook her head faintly. "They shouldn't remember me. They should remember each other. That's how they'll survive." Her words lingered, soft but unshakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Later, when the paperwork was written, when medals were drafted and ceremonies planned, her name was just another in a report, another file in a drawer. But in the valley beyond the mountains, in the homes where laughter returned, she was more. She was the shadow that stood when others fell, the face overlooked but the courage remembered. The girl with the wooden horse would tell her children one day. And the silence would carry her memory farther than any banner, any anthem ever could. Harris saw her one last time before they parted ways. She stood on a tarmac, the scarf bright against her fatigues, the wooden horse strapped to her pack. The wind whipped around them, engines roaring. She turned her face toward him, just long enough for their eyes to meet. And then she walked away. No words, no promises. Only silence. A silence stronger than steel. A silence that lingered, heavy, eternal.